Let's go back to those GDP figures now. Professor Servaas van den Berg is a professor of economics at the Socio-Economic Research Centre at Stellenbosch. Professor, good afternoon to you. I remember very well the research that you and your colleagues released showing how many people were unable to just get enough food during the lockdown. These figures today, a 51% decline in GDP in the second quarter, they really prove your earlier research was correct.
They do indeed, but I think one has to also consider that when one talks about 51% decline, that is a so-called annualized decline, which means decline if this were to continue for a full year. For the quarter, it is only 16%, and that is very much in line with what we saw in the loss in jobs in the first quarter. Compared to before the lockdown. So it is not unexpected that we have had this decline. And of course, we've all experienced it, so I think we all know that that has been what has occurred in South Africa.
One of the big issues, and I realize the politicians and the different people in our society will argue, and so we should argue, in fact, about it. But you're a professor of economics. Where would you start with interventions? How do we start to get the economy going again? And I realize I'm asking you to fix a problem that goes back at least to the 1970s and probably much longer.
Yes, to a large extent, the long-term problem in the South African economy is our poor level of human capital, which means an improvement in education is a necessary but not a sufficient requirement for economic growth. Our problem, though, is that that takes long. In the meantime, we have to get back to at least the levels we were at, and that is going to take some time because there's a lack of confidence, there's a world economy in recession, and we have an economy in which the fiscal situation has become much more difficult as a result of the high expenditures that we had to maintain to deal with the impact of the lockdown.
I mean, there's so many different problems. I mean, and I've been sort of making this point that even the non-ideological areas, like the release of cell phone spectrum, there hasn't actually been, any progress there. Is there just a failure of government to act? I mean, would action by government actually help?
I think, yes, it would. But government in itself cannot really create growth. What they can do at best is create the conditions under which growth can take place. But that requires, again, it requires confidence, and that is going to be very fragile for quite a while, one would think. It also requires that we keep government spending under control, and that in itself is going to be extremely difficult. And one sees quite a lot of pressure on the fiscus in the next few quarters. So I see that as a potentially big problem that government would have to face.
If we don't have an intervention, what happens? We get poorer and poorer, right?
Yes. Without turning around what we've experienced during this lockdown, and without getting the economy growing at least an acceptable pace, we are getting poorer. And in fact, what these figures show is that on average, we are about 17% poorer than we were before the lockdown. And of course, the next quarter was also not very good. The one we've just finished, or the one that we're in now, will also be we'll see some recovery. But for the year, we can expect that the South African economy would probably shrink by about 10%, which means that on average, we would be 10% poorer. But of course, that does not affect everybody equally. Those who have lost their jobs, those who have been furloughed, they have been affected much more than the rest of us. So obviously, there are also very important distributional implications of what has happened.
I mean, in situations like this, what tends to happen, if I've understood economic theory correctly, and you're the professor, not me, is that those with capital actually come out of this in a stronger position because their capital is worth more.
Yes, generally that is the case, and also that in a situation where generally speaking there are more opportunities because of many many firms who have that have no longer survived, etc. Those that did survive are probably going to be stronger after this if they can get through the next half a year or so. But of course, that it means that we've got a much thinner base on which our economy rests now.